Hey guys, and welcome back to the Natty Scene, your insight into natural bodybuilding with your host AJ Morris. And obviously we had last week a awesome natural bodybuilder in the form of Damien Lees as a guest. You know that we always do the updates with Vicky, and now we're even more lucky to be joined by another epic natural bodybuilder in the form of Valentin Tambosi, who I did ask how to pronounce the name before the podcast, and yes, I still managed to somehow screw it up a little bit. But guys, like, this guy is a guy that I followed. This is why I reached out to Valentin, because obviously I follow very in depth with Cliff Wilson. Now Valentin was one of Cliff's clients for this year's contest season across the pond, and doing shows several places, and really making his stance in natural bodybuilding, especially with regards to immense conditioning. We were just talking off air about how he really did achieve the higher level, elite level of conditioning, and that to me always stands out because I know how much that takes, and I'm always intrigued to find out how that person felt, what they had to do to really get to that caliber of conditioning. And it just excites me, and I'm sure that it excites other people too. So I'm really excited to get to know Valentin a little bit more, and also find out a bit more about his sort of bodybuilding journey. So Valentin, just to give the listeners a brief introduction to yourself, that if they don't follow you on social media, who are you, how old you are, and what you're about, dude.
Yeah, thanks AJ for having me, and thanks for that intro. I mean, I hope I can live up to it, and let's chat some natural bodybuilding, man. I started lifting about 9 years ago, and initially got into it because I just wanted to get a bit stronger for playing basketball. I was playing basketball and was getting pushed around on the court, so basically I wanted to start lifting weights and just get strong in general.
Sure.
And from that basically came the passion for bodybuilding, and I within like 6 months I made the change to just lifting weights and getting into it more and more, and from there things just progressed, right?
Yeah.
So, prior to that I was pretty active in team sports, soccer, basketball, stuff like that, the usual, I would say.
Were you a skinny guy?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Very skinny as a kid.
Your build almost looks like you were previously quite a small, slender guy. That's the way the musculature looks on you at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Plus, that also gets us to the next point as far as conditioning goes. I have to be conditioned, otherwise I will just get wiped off the stage, right?
For sure. So, at this present moment in time, I mean, for sure, I think one of your goals in the future is to get like as muscular as you possibly can. But I think, and obviously whilst maintaining a balance and obviously we'll go on to discuss how you're doing that in your potential off season. But yeah, I think that a lot of sort of the smaller individuals. Now, a question to you on that, like whilst you're on sort of the initial grounds of how you got into things. Like, do you think that the fact that you were a smaller, skinnier guy, were you always one of those kids that was quite active and always found it relatively comfortable to stay lean and found it more hard to actually put on weight?
I feel like that changed over the course of my life. So as a kid, I was eating so much food and I just couldn't gain any weight. And as I get older, I'm 29 years now, I feel I have to stay a bit more hungry than I want to during my off season to not get too fat and just stay in a great place as far as body composition goes. So for me, it changed over the years. So I cannot say I'm still that kind of typical ectomorph skinny guy that just can throw down carbs like crazy.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting because you seem to come from like a similar body type and similar activity levels and like look to someone like Nunes as a bodybuilder. And like Nunes is a prime example of someone who like just in his off season he seems to eat like a big amount of food and not really push his body weight up significantly, and he seems to like always complain or struggle of the like feeling like he's got to eat more and expend less calories. So you'd expect that, but it is interesting. I think I had a podcast with Brandon Wadus, and he did mention that as he's gotten older, he's felt like he's eating less in gaining phases. So maybe this is something that's just correlative in some people. Now, obviously, so you were active, like super active as a kid. You got into training for bodybuilding, or at least training to improve your sporting endeavors. What was your first experience of bodybuilding like? Where did you see your first bodybuilder? Who was it? And did that initial sort of look at bodybuilding ignite the fire straight away for you?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think everybody approaches competition and competing at first in a very naive kind of way, and you just see those guys and you want to look like that. Yeah. And the first bodybuilders I followed are usually the dog prep guys. I know you're familiar with Dante Trudell and all those guys. Yeah. And I was just diving right into that type of training, which was way too early at that point of my lifting career. But I progressed.
On forums, mate.
Yeah, exactly. So all those guys, and that was really the first time where I was thinking, like, man, this bodybuilding thing could be something I'm getting really into it, because I was just impressed by the dedication those guys put in, and how much they just buy into this stuff and just do this stuff with laser focus day in and day out. Yeah. And so initially it wasn't that much. I wasn't that focused on natural bodybuilding at first. That came later, because at first you're just being motivated by whoever motivates you, right? You cannot grasp the whole bodybuilding community in itself. Absolutely. So, and later on, I started to get more and more interested in the natural bodybuilders, and somebody that still stands out to me to this day is Brian Whittaker. Yes. I mean, I absolutely love his build, and I'm sure you've seen some of his posing videos when he was like 2 or 3 weeks out from New York. Yeah, man. I watch those during prep almost every day.
Yeah, same.
That's just the level of conditioning I feel like that draws me so much natural bodybuilding. Yeah. Because if I compare it to, this week is the Mr. Olympia, and if I compare those physiques to natural bodybuilders, it just obviously there's the size difference and everything, but the conditioning and the way a natural bodybuilder looks on stage and the way Brian looks in that video, that's something that I wanted to look like that. And that's probably a brief overview of what got me motivated to do this.
Yeah, I mean, with Brian, I can totally relate. It's so funny that you said that with the posing videos. Literally before I did my walk this morning, I watched 1 week out from the WNBF Worlds.
Yeah.
And I think what I love about Brian and what I love about natural bodybuilding, probably very similar to you, is that, like, a lot of people say about Brian is that, like, when you see him in the gym or when you see him in, like, just walking around backstage, doesn't even look like he really lifts.
Yeah.
And then takes off everything. And he's just absurd. It's just unreal. Like, the density across all level of musculature, like, it's just unreal. And it's just, it almost just has like I think comparative to like what you're saying with the Olympia guys, Brian, almost every show that he does, it's just this polished, presentable look that looks professional. And when you see an IFBB guy turn up a little bit off, it doesn't look professional. It doesn't look like professional bodybuilding, does it? But then you see the lineup at WNBF Worlds, and the top 10 will just look professional. And it seems to be that, obviously we have less variables to control with regards to things going in, and obviously we just focus on training and nutrition, and then maximizing the other small variables around that. Whereas they've got so much to go on that they seem to get things wrong a little bit more frequently. But yes, I totally agree with that sort of motivation. Now, before you first competed, what year? Let's just go into so obviously, when was your first competitive season, mate?
That was 2014, so 3 years ago.
Okay.
And it was a 26-week prep at that time.
And how long had you been actually training and sort of like training and eating and enjoying yourself and being passionate about bodybuilding before that first show?
I would say about 5 years.
How important do you think that was? And do you
God.
that built the majority of your tissue?
Yeah, that was massively important. Don't jump into shows too early, guys. I mean, the stage will always be there. And I think when people that follow you look at you, you're already so experienced at your age, and this is your second competitive season, right?
Third, actually, yeah.
Third.
I've done quite a few.
Yeah. So you have so much time, but you already have gained so much stage experience. So that's obviously a great combination. But at the same time, guys jump into shows way too early.
Agreed.
And
I think I did personally.
Yeah, and then sometimes they push, if they're capable of pushing it really hard, they just lose the fun of it all, and they just never compete again. So they do their first show at 19, push it really hard, and then never compete again. So try to avoid that, and you can do a lot more frequent shows and competitive season as you get older. I mean, just look at somebody like Marshall Johnson, who's like on stage every weekend, every year, and he didn't do that in his 20s. He was building tissue at that time. Yeah. So you have to invest into your muscle mass at first, and then you can concern yourself with competing.
Yeah. Did you ever think or attempt a prep in those sort of 4 or 5 years and then think, no, I'm not ready, let's go again for another gaining phase? Like, did you know natural bodybuilding existed, or were you just eating and growing? Like, what was the situation there?
I knew it existed, but I didn't attempt a prep and then just aborted it. Okay. I did a few mini cuts that I pushed hard, but yeah, nothing comparable to a real contest prep, right?
Okay. So what instilled you with the confidence when you started that first prep to do a show? Was it motivated by someone else? Were people in the gym saying, you know, Valentin, you're looking huge now, let's get you on stage? Or did you get motivated by someone else? Like, what was the situation when you started that first prep and thought, right, I'm going to attack this?
Yeah, that's a good question, man, because I can't really recall a specific scenario or situation where somebody told me you should go on stage and now I'm going to do it. It was basically just intrinsic motivation that drove me to the stage, and basically me being pretty naive about the whole process and thinking, man, I'm now weighing 200 pounds. I will cut down like 15 pounds and be ready for the stage. And then you start cutting and you realize it's going to be probably more than that.
Yeah, massively. How long was the prep then? I think you already mentioned it, but how long was the prep for that first show that you did?
It was between 24 and 26 weeks, and would just, given my starting point, way too less time. I mean, I should have done like a lot longer prep, and the two things it always comes down to as far as prepping goes, it's how much time do you have and what is your starting point. If you have those two things in place, you're pretty much golden all the way, man, as long as you're not doing any major dumb things. So, yeah.
Sure. So what was your approach for this first prep? I know that you didn't obviously have Cliff. Did you have another coach, and did you work with a macro tracking perspective for your diet, or was it more like a meal plan? What sort of approach did you use for this contest prep? And looking back, do you think that it was optimal?
Yeah, so for that first contest, I wasn't working with Cliff. I was working with somebody else.
Okay.
And we were doing meal plans.
Okay.
And which was totally fine at that point because I was used to it and I enjoyed it, actually.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that much of an issue. People are always so dismissive when it comes to meal plans and everything. There's different approaches for different people, and you really have to fit it to the individual. And some people just thrive on meal plans, so that shouldn't be a concern. So it wasn't optimal in terms of the way the prep was set up and how long it took for me to actually get in decent conditioning. So I just needed more time. And at the end, I was doing already so much cardio and was stressed out, and it was just way too much. It was overwhelming for my first prep.
And how did you get on? How did you do? Like, what was the end result? And were you happy or were you sort of quite frustrated in the time that it took you to get there? And like, did you enjoy the stage experience? What was it like for you?
Yeah, the stage experience was actually great. I didn't do that great. I was like third out of five guys, and the quality of competition wasn't that great.
Okay.
But it didn't matter to me. It was, I just wanted to get my feet wet and be on stage, do my posing and stuff, and that was a great experience by itself. But afterwards, I wasn't frustrated or anything. All I thought about was improve, improve, improve. So I wanted just to have another run at it as fast as possible. Not meaning I want to compete right away, but I just thought to myself, man, there are so many things I can optimize here, from posing to nutrition to training, everything. A tan, I mean everything.
Yeah.
And that just lit a fire under my ass, and I knew at that point, the next time I'm getting on stage, I will present something totally different and something I can be really proud of. And I achieved that this year, but there was no frustration at all. In 2014, it was just, man, let's go and build on this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's something really important to note, is that when you do your first show, you do reverse engineer. When you come out of it, you think, holy shit, there were so many things in my off season I wasn't doing quite well. And obviously at the same time, you need to think that obviously some of the things that are a requirement or a prerequisite of a contest prep, you can't necessarily apply thoroughly to an off season that has balance, because you've got to realize that, you know, when you say no every single week to social events when you're in a prep, to be accurate, you've got to start saying yes a little bit more, otherwise you'll have no fucking friends. So you know, there are some things that you have to realize that you've got to be a little bit more relaxed on, but for the most part, I think it does open up your eyes to, like, I could be way more consistent here, I could nail this variable, that variable. And I think every time, I'm sure you would agree, you learn something from a contest prep, and you take it into your off season, and you have a more productive off season. So I think that's really important. So in the time between 2014 and 2017, what did that look like? Because obviously that's quite a long time to be in a massing or a gaining phase. How did you structure that in terms of pushing your body weight up, pushing lifts up, and then obviously trying to build as much muscle as you can whilst not getting too far out of shape? What was the structure like?
Yeah, good question. So basically, I tried to string as many months together as possible where I was gaining weight and spending time in a surplus without getting fat, basically. And I know there's different approaches to this, and I'm a bit torn at the current moment as far as nutritional periodization goes, because I think there's advantages to pushing it really hard and then doing a mini cut, or doing extensive, slower gaining phases like Eric Helms prescribes. Sure. So I think it really comes down to the person and what you, not just body part, but also what your psychological profile is like, and what you're really into, basically. Because if you like to push it aggressively in the gym and want to do the same thing with your nutrition, then maybe gaining for 8 or 9 months at a time is not gonna work out. You're just getting fat.
Yeah.
At the same time, a person like that who does like a 4-month bulk and then does a short mini cut of 3 to 6 weeks, maybe that person does a lot better with that approach than with the slow gaining approach. But for me, it was the slow gaining approach that worked really well, I have to say. I just had to stay really disciplined, a lot more disciplined than people believe you have to be in the off season, because otherwise I just blow up.
Yeah.
And like I mentioned earlier, I always have to be slightly hungry, even when I'm growing and in a surplus and eating plenty of calories. I feel like that is the case for a lot more people than what are out there and actually think they can just eat and pound away food. But for most people, it's not working. You have to be a little bit. Should be able to eat a little bit more in order to stay at a good body fat percentage.
Sure. I think there's always an element of control that we need to have over our diet, right? Like, it's not necessarily drastic restriction or anything like that. It's more so just being mindful and realizing that, you just can't pound food because it's not productive. You're going to reach a point where body fat accumulates to a point where nothing becomes optimal with regards to like insulin sensitivity, nutrient uptake, digestion. Everything just goes down the drain as soon as you get to a certain level of body fat, and then you just spend longer trying to taper that all off. So I think, like obviously the way that you periodize things is just making sure you're managing things. Basically, you can take a slow approach, fast approach. I know that sort of Mike Israetel, I think, is coming out with more research to sort of back the faster, more aggressive gain followed by an aggressive mini cut, which is interesting. And I think both ways can work. The only way that I've ever done it myself has always been just stay in a surplus for as long as I can. And I think personally, from my perspective, and what that provides is a greater level of momentum. I think that I've had like just greater strings of training sessions, whereas I think if I was mentally pushing like a 6 week, 7 week mass, and I knew that at the end I was going to have a mini cut, I think I'd get a bit inclined to get a bit anxious about that mini cut coming up, and that my training performance might taper. But that's a very interesting topic, and obviously people just need to keep in mind that when you go into an off season, it's not just about getting fat and just wasting your time, because you're just going to make the next phase harder. So obviously, with that, you came into 2017 in a pretty good position, I imagine. Start point was probably a lot better than when you were in 2014. So how far out from your initial first show did you contact Cliff, and what sort of position were you in with regards to your starting macros at that point? What did things look like when you contacted Cliff?
Yeah, I contacted Cliff in summer of 2016. So in order to get prep started in around November, December, I knew I had to inquiry really early with him. And that was actually perfect timing. And so he took me on for November, and we started prep in November.
Okay.
And with the goal of competing at a German show at the end of May.
Okay.
Plans changed along the way, but we'll get into that.
Okay.
But that was the initial plan, giving us plenty of time. Plus, my starting point was I was really, really lean. According to DEX, I was like 11% body fat at the start of prep, and that was just perfect for me.
Okay.
It was just good body fat percentage where I felt good, where I had plenty of calories at my disposal, and I looked fairly lean. So that was my starting point, and I think we started out with slightly less than 3,000 calories on my regular. And so that was a lot to work with for Cliff.
Yeah, for sure. So over the course of the prep, comparative to the one that you did in 2014, I know that in 2014 you ended up on a lot of cardio. You ended up on probably low calories. I know from following your prep that you did end up on, like, you had some days which were pretty low calorie in your 2017 prep. Everyone has to push and everyone has to do that sort of phase at some point. But what did the structure look like in terms of both your rate of loss and the way that you did things in terms of cardio? Because I know that Cliff is a little bit different in terms of how he usually likes to use cardio as a tool for contest prep athletes.
Yeah, so cardio was not really a big factor in the entire prep at all. Cool. I mean, I tried to keep my activity in general, steps per day goes pretty high, but we never had to do any enormous amount of cardio besides that. It was like 15 minutes of list per week the end.
What was your steps like per day?
Always hovered around 6,000 to 8,000 per day, so not super active based on me sitting in front of a computer and answering emails all day, right? Yeah. You're not that super active. So it really came down to what you do with your nutrition, basically. So that's I really have to say, when people think about Cliff or any contest prep coach, they always think about the exciting stuff, right? The rapid backload, or what are you doing with training and stuff like that. But the thing really is the way he guided myself through that prep. That made all the difference, because we had some weeks in there where we had a small diet break, then we had more frequent refeeds, and it was really just based on what he saw in the pictures and based on my body weight. And you mentioned rate of loss. It was usually between the typical what we're all used to, 0.5 to 1.5% per week. Usually you lose a bit more at the beginning of prep because water and glycogen, stuff like that. But at the later end, it was almost nothing. But like Cliff also has mentioned, every single pound makes a huge difference at the end. I mean, it's absolutely amazing what 2 pounds can do when you're already fairly lean. And those extra 2 pounds can reveal a lot of stuff. Yeah. So, yeah, that's a brief view. But it was, looking back at it, it was really nothing magical he did. It was just basically really guiding me through that prep with a lot of poise and being very, very patient.
Yeah, so I'm interested to know when he implemented a diet break. So I've got like 2 questions on this really. We'll go the diet break way first. So when he implemented a diet break, obviously you said he'd take into account your weight. Now I've had Cliff on the podcast before, so I kind of know how his check-in process works in terms of you'll send him an email, you'll send him sort of like sort of roughly just sort of how your week went, and then the pictures and your weight. It seems to be a very straightforward approach with Cliff, which I kind of like. It's just like very straightforward data.
Oh yes.
And so in terms of when he'd give you a diet break, what would he sort of say? Would he say, Valentin, we're having a diet break because your weight has dropped? Or would he say your physique is looking flat? Or would he take training into account in terms of your training performance? Like, what would be the rationale behind having that diet break?
Basically, just being ahead of time. That's it. Basically, if you're in a good position and time is on your side, like I mentioned earlier, if time is your ally, you want to make use of that. And we just basically did those diet breaks and those extra refeeds because I was ahead of time, and he didn't want me to push it too far. Getting ready early is never an issue. He will say that himself.
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's easy. You just bring calories up, right? You're eating to show as. And so we just did that, and it was just based on me being ahead of time. So we did that around January, at the beginning of February.
What did it kind of look like? Where did calories go from and to?
Basically everything as far as protein stayed pretty much the same, but he just added carbs and fats for the diet break. And it wasn't super long. It was like 3 or 4 weeks. But weight kept progressing in a way we liked it, and so we just stuck to it. So yeah.
Nice. And I know there was a point in your prep where you got to a certain level of conditioning, and Cliff replied saying, right, cool, we're bringing calories up. Fat loss is essentially, we're done with as much fat loss as we needed to get off. Now, how was that for you mentally when you almost felt like, you must have felt like, I'm not dieting because calories are now coming up, but I'm still in prep and I'm still in a calorie deficit. How was that mentally for you? Because obviously when you're dieting down and like you're looking for those extra pounds, you're looking for that extra bit of conditioning, that is a very motivating factor to keep you pushing and to keep you pushing through the dark days. It's like, I know that I you go to sleep knowing that you're in a deficit, knowing that you're going to get more fat loss. How was it mentally to sort of like deal with the fact that you're done with fat loss and now it's all about sort of like maintaining and trying to feel a little bit more human?
Yeah, since weight was still trending downwards quite a bit, it wasn't like crazy, but it was still trending downwards. I had no issue with it at all because usually I struggle with maintenance phases because I feel like everything is on hold. I'm very black and white, which is not a good thing. I'm very black and white as far as that goes because I either want to gain or I want to lose. But yeah, you have to understand, everybody who's listening to this has to understand those maintaining phases are super, super important, man. And especially during a long prep.
Yeah.
But it can be a struggle when you get on the scale 5 days in a row and you're pretty much weighing the same every single time, thinking to yourself, I want to get better. And less weight equals fat loss equals progress, at least in my mind at that time period. And that was a bit of a struggle. But like I said, weight was slightly trending down, and I just could see visual changes at that point, obviously. And there was just eating a bit more. Training performance was awesome.
Amazing.
And Yeah, and that's just a great spot to be in. It's you really have to reassess your mindset and just don't think about gaining or losing all the time.
Yeah. I can totally relate because I'm in a moderately similar position with regards to food coming up a little bit and training performance just taking a massive positive turn, and my intensity is just getting way better. And that's what I'm sort of relaying a lot of my focus in at the moment, is just the fact that I can actually start to relish in my training sessions again, which when you're pushing on those low calorie days, it's just tough to find that motivation to get in there and kill it, because you don't mentally have it there, and physically most days you don't have it there either. So there's a combination of the two variables, and the sessions just start to take a hit. How did your reverse sort of look in terms of when you'd add calories? Were you adding sort of, I've heard some approaches that would be very, very slow, in the sense of maybe something like 5 grams of carbs, 5 grams of fat, which, to be honest, if you look at it from a nutritional perspective, like, can you really add that unless you are on like the most regimented meal plan ever, where you eat the same foods every day and then add 5 grams of fat? Because that's probably a way to do it. But was it more so I guess a bit more of a bigger jump? Was it more so like 20 grams of carbs a week? Like, how did that reverse look, man?
Yeah, it was definitely, he was bumping up carbs quite considerably.
Okay.
It was like 20 or 30 or 40 grams of carbs depending on a week.
Okay.
Not every week, but if you look across a few weeks, it was like 40 grams of carbs. And I think even if you're already at a stage where you're pretty lean, those tiny changes don't make that big of a difference, where you bring up calories, like you said, by 10 grams of carbs. That's like a bite of apple. It's nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, at that point, you just plow. You just need every single calorie you need, and you just I think you don't have to be super conservative at that point with those increases as you do a diet break.
Sure. So, sort of wrapping up your season, what was your best look and your best outing? Because I know following your prep, you seem to suggest on your social media that the last show that you did of the year, you didn't think that you brought the same conditioning that you did for an earlier show, or at least that's what I gathered from what you said on your social media. So what happened, and sort of why do you think that happened and that took place?
Sure. I think I have to provide some context first before we get into that. So Absolutely. as I started working with Cliff in November, my goal was to do a show at the end of May in Germany, which is a show under the INBA Europe Federation.
All right.
So, which is a pretty big show. The Germans have some strong competition going on. I mean, and very similar to the BNBF, which is just from the level of competition, it's crazy.
Yeah.
The Germans there's some great competitors there. So I definitely wanted to get in there to get some comparisons and see how I stack up against the competition. But around February, March, I was telling Cliff that why not come over to the US and do a show over there, maybe even a pro qualifier, and see how I do that. So we found the show, and it was actually a month earlier, 5 weeks earlier than the initial show we planned in Germany.
Nice.
So we had to that was right around the diet break, and we just had to get right back to fat loss, right? So we pushed it for the next 2 months until the end of April to the show, and it was literally like a week before the show where I had my first glute lines. It was like within a week they showed up, and Cliff was really worried at first because he said it's getting really close now, and those glutes are just so stubborn. But within 1 week, I made like 3 weeks progress, and we were golden.
What was the weight drop like? I'm intrigued. What was the weight drop to have, like, to go from very close to glutes to full on glutes? What was the weight drop? Do you remember?
So just like we said earlier, it was like a pound. It was nothing. It was nothing. So every time somebody gets really nervous about their conditioning and glutes not showing up, be patient, because you may be just a pound away, and that's nothing, man. And as soon as they showed up, I was just so confident about everything, and did really well there. Won my PMBA Pro Cup there, and basically just continued on after that with the course. And for the show we planned in Germany, I showed up. So basically a week prior to that, and 1 week out, I was definitely the best conditioning I've reached during that season. It was around mid-May, and I've recently posted a few of those pictures, and that was just what I had in mind as far as conditioning goes. Yeah. I'm not big. I'm not a big guy, but the conditioning was at a level where I said, yeah, I'm very pleased with that. I just need to put on more kilograms of muscle onto that frame. So then I actually traveled to a seminar by Cliff in Greece.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was like 1 week out, and that was probably not optimal due to the stress of traveling and everything. And I didn't show up as crisp at the Germany show as I wanted to.
Okay.
But at that point, I already have reached my goal. I've got my natural pro card, right? So we basically, I could have ended my season right there, but I felt like two shows in one season is not what I wanted to do. I just wanted to gain more stage experience and get some more comparison shots, basically.
Yeah.
I really like the idea of comparing yourself to others and get some objective feedback, right? So the next show we targeted was the Windy City Natural. It was mid-August, and it was, looking back, it was just way too much time between that second and the third show. It was like 12 weeks between that. We reversed, and at that point, the maintaining was a lot tougher than I thought it would be. Because until that second show, I had zero adherence issues, absolutely nothing. Yeah. And not one time did I go over a gram. It was so easy too. So it wasn't even like fighting to stay with my calories. But after the second show, I struggled a lot with it. And which is another thing. I think most people, there's just a certain time period where you can string together show after show, and after that your season has to be over, because you're done. Yeah. Absolutely, you're done. And at that point I was done. So, that last show wasn't optimal, but it was still a great experience. But I know for my next season, which will be in 2020, I will diet and I will string together as many shows in like a 10-week span and then be done with it afterwards. Not any more 12-week breaks between shows. It's not optimal, man.
No, definitely not. And like, for perspective, you were still shredded at that final show, but just not your peak. And I think it comes down to the fact that mate, you were in prep for fucking ages. And you're very right in saying that there is literally a switch that will flick at some point, and you just can't keep going. Regardless of where calories are at or whatever, the body fat that you're at is just something that you just can't sit at for ages with it feeling relatively comfortable and adherent to everything. So that's very interesting to hear, and obviously most people will, I think, very, very few people that listen to this podcast will prep for that long. But if anyone decides to do something of that length, then at least they can have some experience here. So, final question, man. So, obviously, going away from the final show of the season, what are your goals for the off season in terms of improving any potential body parts to stand up on that pro stage? And obviously, I mean, probably one of your goals is to win pro shows at some point. So how do you deem that you're going to do that, and what's the plan for the off season at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's one of the most important points to have right after the show. You need to have your goals written down, and don't just think to yourself, okay, the season is over, I can just do whatever and nothing matters. So I have lifting goals for pretty much every lift there is out there. I want to I want to just crank the logbook and just get stronger and stronger. That's my main goal right now. I know this is something you believe in. This is something that has greatly influenced me starting out with dog crap training. I'm just used to logging every single session, and I feel totally lost when I go into the gym without knowing what I'm about to do and what numbers I have to beat. It just gives me a level of confidence and a level of purpose to my training session. When I go in there, I have to do like 12 reps at least on this movement today. So that's the same kind of attitude I approach this off season, because it's gotten me some good results. And as far as body parts goes, I definitely have to bring up my back. This is something I think usually most competitors can do. Can use some improvement to their lower body and their back. That's usually two areas where most people can add some tissue and improve. So that's basically my focal point for now. And I mean, I have so much time, which is great, but at the same time, I want to maximize that time and don't just like many people, like 1 year after the competitive season is just lost because they just train and have fun and stuff, which is great. But I wanna really show up, improve the next time I step up.
You know?
Absolutely, and you wanna, like you said, there have to be certain goals, and winning a pro show is definitely one of them for my next season. So I have to get started right away because those guys are good.
And you know, this goes back to what we were saying about the pros in natural bodybuilding. I remember listening to a podcast with Brian Whittaker, and he was saying on the plane back from WNBF Worlds, every single year when he'd come short in the overall, he'd write exactly what he wanted to improve on his off season. And you're doing that exact thing as a professional bodybuilder. And I think, you know, personally, I think some of the naturals, there's so many dedicated guys on the assisted side of bodybuilding and the IFBB, but I think that when we have the variable of just training and nutrition, we really have to maximize those things. And that's what us as natural bodybuilders do very well, is we literally are so meticulous with what we want to do and how we want to go about it, that we make significant improvements year to year, despite the minor changes in stage weight. They show up, you know. And if you put on, you know, 2-3 pounds of stage weight, that would be huge.
That's amazing. I think the bottom line of all of this is have a plan, regardless if you're prepping or if you want to build muscle and you're in the off season. Even if it's an extended off season, periodize your training. Really block out those. I already have blocked out every single month until 2020. I already know when I'm gonna do a mini cut. I already know when I will maintain, and everything will happen according to plan because I have a plan. If you don't have a plan, you cannot say that. And the mental approach, the way you approach it, is different if you just wing it. And every single day, every single training week, every single training month is so precious. You just have to make the most of it. Especially if you're natural.
Totally agreed. So, mate, we will wrap things up there. It's been an awesome episode. Lots of very valuable information for the listeners, I'm sure. So if people are looking to follow you a little bit further, and I know that you coach as well, so feel free to sort of give them where you're most active on social media, and then also tell them where they can potentially inquire if they want to look into your coaching, and give the listeners an idea about sort of who you coach specifically, and how you work with clients as well. Is it just online or one-to-one, etc.?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously I'm on Instagram and Facebook. You just search my name, Valentin Tambosi, and I will pop up right away. It's not that many people with that name. And same for my website. It's valentintambosi.com. You can find all the information about my coaching services there. And as far as my clientele goes, I'm getting more and more competitors, which is obviously the goal. I think this is something, there's nothing wrong with general population, and I coach plenty of people there. It's very, very interesting, but I think if you want to specialize in a certain area, you have to go there. And for me, it's definitely male and female physique competitors. I still coach quite a few powerlifters, which is something I enjoy a lot, and which you can learn a lot from that. But as far as my future as a coach goes, I really want to focus on physique competitors, definitely.
Cool, awesome. Well, I'd like to thank you very much for your time, buddy. I'm sure that I will be following your off season up until 2020 with avid eyes on your progress, and I think that it's interesting. Let me see, 2018, 2019. Yes, potential that I will take that similar years out, and maybe we'll be prepping again in 2020, and we can maybe share glute images with each other and tell ourselves that we're still fat. So yes, mate, thank you very much for your time. And guys, thank you for listening. Make sure that you like the podcast if you're on YouTube. Comment below with any questions that you have for me or Valentin. And also, if you're listening on the iTunes app, do us a favor, screenshot that you're listening, tag us both and whack it on your story, and let us know what you think. Share it around, because the more this episode gets out, I think there's a lot of really good points. And obviously, Valentin is a great bodybuilder, and I want to, and we want to spread the world of natural bodybuilding out there, because some people are saying that it's dying, and it's not. It's definitely not. It's only growing. It's only getting better, and
Yes.
we're the ones spreading it. So spread it with us, and thanks for staying around, and thank you, Valentin. Cheers, mate.
Thanks, AJ. Thanks, man.
Cool. Cheers, dude.